I've done it, so hopefully it's all right.
That's great. Thank you very much. So welcome everybody to the course. This is Connecting Children with Rivers. My name is Amy Ellis, and Tracy Standish is supporting me on the call. We are the education and engagement team with Wessex Rivers Trust. We are basing this course mostly around wildlife point of view, but there are other topics that you can teach and kind of for children can experience rivers through. So that's geography, science. You can do an awful lot of measuring, field studies, measuring cross sections and flow rates and all that kind of stuff, and river processes using rivers as well. But for today's purpose, there's so much we kind of wanted to cram in. We're focusing more on the wildlife element, with the view of potentially doing kind of geography or science kind of field work kind of course in the future. So if you think that might be useful to you, then maybe pop in the chat if you think that kind of doing an additional course or a kind of side-by-side course in kind of geography, science, or even kind of heritage, please let us know and we can look into that in the future. Okay, so who are we? So my name is Amy Ellis. I am the Senior Education and Engagement Officer for Wessex Rivers Trust. I've got a degree in environmental science, and I started my career in residential field study centres as an environmental instructor. So where some of you may take your class off to do some abseiling or pond dipping or somewhere like that, kind of residential centre, I was one of those crazy instructors in my very early 20s. I then went on to be project officer for a few different wildlife trusts. I worked on nature reserves and encouraged people to use them. I then set up and ran my own outdoor play business. I became forest school trained with that, and I ran kind of forest school sessions, weekly forest school sessions, and I also ran birthday parties in that kind of same setting. I was also an outdoor lead at a children's nursery, and I've been working at Wessex Rivers Trust since September 2019. I'm really passionate about educating people about the natural world. I love watching children's faces when they just discover something new, however simple it is. It's just so wonderful. And rivers are a big part of my life. They always have been. And yeah, I live where I live. We've got a river right next door. I like to swim in the river. I like to sup, play with my children in the river, just generally experience that kind of blue landscape. So that's me. Tracy, are you okay to introduce yourself?
Yes, hello everybody. I'm Tracy Standish. I'm an education officer with the Wessex Rivers Trust, but I am project based, so I work part-time on the Watercress and Winterbourne's Landscape Partnership Scheme as their education officer, which is focused on the Winterbournes, the headwaters of the Test and Itchen rivers. So my role is quite kind of focused. And that's on covering the wildlife and the heritage of the area as well. I've got a degree in geography, so I'm hoping to kind of tie in a bit more measuring and field studies work as well, if I can. But I kind of fell into environmental education. And I found myself out of the university working for local government at a country park, and also managing a number of local nature reserves in East Dorset. So I had a number of different roles with the council and ran a countryside play project, which encouraged children to make the most out of their local countryside space, whatever it was, whether it was heathland or woodland, had a pond or a stream, just to kind of get outside and play, which was really enjoyable, doing the kind of all community focused engagement and work. I then moved across to Hampshire and Isle of Wight Wildlife Trust, and there I am nature reserve based at Blashford Lakes, which is just near Ringwood. And activities are very mixed, from kind of more formal school sessions to play kind of less formal fun stuff. So we've done snorkeling in the river, and we've made coracles out of willow and then tried to kind of float them down the river, had a bit of a paddle, and done lots of different activities that you don't necessarily do with a school group. So that's been lovely. I've been with Wessex since March last year, so almost a year now, and I still work for Hampshire Isle of Wight Wildlife Trust, so I'm just there 2 days a week now, and with Wessex 3 days. But I'm very keen on the wildlife element that we can kind of share, and getting children out and about and experiencing their local wildlife and their local river.
Thanks, Tracy. That's great. So you can see this is our the patch that we cover. Now we are on the edge of the South Downs National Park, so I appreciate that there's going to be people on this call that well, could be hundreds of miles away from us, but we are kind of a slight patch of us is kind of combined with the South Downs National Park, who is supporting this course today. But our office is based in Salisbury, which is smack bang in the middle of the our area, and we have several river catchments. So we've got the Dorset Stour, the Hampshire Avon, the Test and the Itchen. We've got the New Forest streams, and we've also got the East Hampshire area as well. So we have a huge area to cover, and our education engagement team is very small at the moment, but we're hoping to expand. But we're here to support people from the whole of the South Downs National Park, and give you guys as much information as we can. I think the sessions that we offer as a Rivers Trust at the moment, so we offer to schools and home education groups and to uniform groups. We offer interactive assemblies, which I'll kind of talk you through in a moment. We offer riverbank sessions, so that's obviously on the riverbank, generally doing a bit of river dipping or splashing around in the water if we can. We do classroom follow-up, so that's just looking a bit more in detail at what wildlife we've seen, or kind of the interesting things that we found out about the river, and just kind of looking at that a bit more in depth. We also look at evolution and adaptation, which is a little bit of a scary topic really for teachers, I find, because it is so niche, and is quite some people find very hard to explain, which is perfectly understandable. So that's kind of the year 5, I think mostly year 6 students kind of look into that. But we've got loads of really interactive fun activities that really get it stuck into your head. And then we offer Mayfly in the classroom, which I will talk you through later on as well, and I've also given you quite a lot of resources for that. So in this session, I'm going to talk you through the basics of understanding rivers. So that's, yeah, you kind of your bread and butter, where rivers start and where they end up and that kind of thing. And then going to talk you through how what you need to consider when you're visiting a river. We're then going to talk you through some activities that you can do at a river or related to the river topic. We'll talk briefly about river schools, or the concept of river schools, and then we'll look at how children can kind of value their river, or continue valuing their river. And then we'll go to questions at the end. So understanding rivers, going back to absolute basics, very important thing is the water cycle. So obviously water is absolutely everywhere. Even though you might not be near a river, water is in the air, it's under the ground. It doesn't matter if you have a river flowing by you, or the sea, or a lake near you, or even a pond. It is absolutely everywhere. So encouraging children to know that water is a huge part of their life. Obviously, we couldn't do without it is key. And then talking about the water cycle and how important that is to kind of keep that cycle going. If we were to stop the cycle at any point, then we would get ourselves into quite a lot of trouble. So I'm not going to dwell on this because I'm assuming you guys are quite comfortable with that. But one thing I mentioned about water being under our feet, so something that's quite difficult to for children to kind of grasp the concept of, is that water will be stored kind of everywhere they go. So generally I talk about this on a riverbank, and just think, okay, there's water in the river, but there's also, you're standing on essentially a big sponge, and if you're really heavy and you stamp really hard, then the sponge would kind of squish out and the water would come flowing out. So we generally have some kind of ridiculously large lump of chalk that we can show them, and we might pass the chalk around, or they might have their individual pieces of chalk, and you can see that there are loads and loads of different tiny little holes in here. So where we are, we talk about chalk, but obviously there's different locations will have different geology, but a lot of the South Downs will have chalk as their main bedrock. So chalk is tiny skeletons of sea creatures that kind of sunk to the bottom of the sea, and they all kind of collected there around about 100 million years ago. So kind of around the time of the dinosaurs. I'm saying this quite loosely, but basically some really old animals died. They died a long time ago, and they've been squashed, and now we've got chalk, which obviously we use all the time, and it's absolutely fascinating, and we love it at Wessex Rivers Trust because it produces some incredible rivers, and it filters our water. It gives us water supply for the year round, and it's just generally wonderful stuff. Like I said, it's like big sponge, so a sponge is very useful to demonstrate. So you can actually take a sponge with you and have it soaking the water, so they know that a sponge can hold water because of all the holes, and it obviously just drips out. So the chalk does exactly the same thing. It's just a lot harder and does it over a longer period of time. But you can use a sponge as that example. And across the South Downs, you'll have quite a few chalk streams. There's only about 200 chalk streams in the world, and in this country, we've got 85% of them. So we've got 160 in the UK. So they're quite rare. And us at Wessex, we love them because quite a few of our rivers are chalk streams. And the headwaters, the beginning of the rivers generally start in chalk, and so it gives our rivers a really, really good start, and it allows them to be really clear, and then produces fantastic vegetation, and therefore the vegetation is the beginning of kind of food chain, and therefore things can thrive from there. So just talking through the journey of a river, going from source to sea. Again, this is quite basic knowledge, but it might just refresh your memories from when you were at school. But this is one of our activities that we do generally within an interactive assembly. So this is just one class taking part of this assembly, but we can do it as well, depending on the size of the school, but quite a few classes at once, where they all sit around the outside of a river catchment or watershed, and then we lay out a long piece of fabric through the middle of the hall or wherever it is. It could be in the playground, and then we just talk through what happens to a river from source to sea. So we have loads of props. I've brought some behind me, so I've even laid out a bit of a river behind me, and we just talk through loads of props. The children get given these props, and then they get taught about them, and then they can place them on the river where they think it's appropriate. So we start off showing them that there's the sea. Obviously the rivers will want to flow out to the sea eventually. There's the watershed, so that's demonstrated by the rope around the outside, like I just showed you. And any water that flows inside that kind of inside that watershed will flow downstream into the river. So we demonstrate that with our little cloud. So that's kind of goes down there, so a child can place that inside the water catchment. We've also got labels. So we've got these lovely props, but obviously you guys can just print them out onto, you know, or laminate them or whatever, and just kind of place them in your kind of, and draw with chalk your river. But we kind of, obviously we do this quite a lot, so we have these kind of chunky wooden labels that that children can kind of stand up at various places. So we ask them to find the source of our river. We then get someone to label the mouth. So I kind of just demonstrate that it's a big part of, you open and kind of, it's like the river sings as it goes into the sea, so it's nice and big open mouth as they go into the sea. You then got lots of tributaries, so they're the arms coming into the river, and you've got the confluence. So I call that the armpit. That manages to, children remember that, because it's like an armpit of the river. So you've got an arm coming into the main body of the river, so the confluence is just the joining part. We talk about 3 different parts of the river. So we've got the lower course, the middle course, and the upper course. And then we talk through each of these individual things. So we've already mentioned the rain clouds in the upper course. So that's where a lot of our water will kind of gather. You generally kind of have nice steep-sided hills where things will flow down, depending on your geology. You've also got nice lush vegetation. Where we are, we have lots of kind of gravel beds, and that's where trout, salmon might lay their eggs. And then you've also got water crowsfoot, which we demonstrate. This isn't technically water crowsfoot, but we demonstrate it with this lovely kind of flowing plant. But it just shows you that the plant life is not just on the edge of the river; it is in the centre as well. What was going to show you? Tracy's fantastic with her willow work. So Tracy's managed to produce a gorgeous mayfly, which we can demonstrate. So mayfly have a really interesting life cycle, which I'll talk you through later, but it's wonderful to show them the kind of shape of them and how kind of majestic they are. So we've kind of popped them in as well. And also, one thing to consider is our human impacts on the river. So we have an abstraction pipe at this point. So that's when we're kind of talking about humans, how we use the river. So obviously rivers are wonderful for wildlife, but they're also wonderful for us. So we like to use them and take the water for us to water our crops, or to drink, or however we want to use our water. So that's what we talk about with the upper course. Within the middle course, we talk a bit more about the kind of heritage of rivers. So we have a mill that we kind of show. So water mills, we can talk about a lot about the history of our rivers and what these are used for, because obviously it's a wonderful power source. So we've got water mills. We also can talk about eel houses. So that's when it's not just houses for eels. It's how this looks a bit like a mill, where people used to catch eels. They used to kind of take up the current of the water. Eels would go through, and they would essentially just net them as they swam through. And also, we're talking about heritage. Water meadows are quite vital to a lot of our rivers and our history. And so we demonstrate that with sheep, because water meadows used to be fantastic for grazing. They were created to increase the growth of the vegetation. So fantastic for sheep. So we've got a lot of vegetation in this section, and then we've also talked a bit about the wildlife as well. So we talk about how humans can do some really wonderful things for wildlife and help wildlife. So we put in a few logs to demonstrate how we can just kind of leave our rivers wild for wildlife. So and the kind of classic kingfisher and an otter. So if you're very quiet, which generally a group of children are not by the river, but if you are very quiet, or you're home educators, then you might be able to spot some wonderful wildlife. And also, you may not consider these as being kind of riparian or linked to rivers species, but bats, obviously you can use rivers as well. So you have different bat species that follow different habitats, but bats will use the lines of the rivers to collect lots of bugs as well. So that's the middle course. And then the lower course, it generally starts to kind of flatten out, and you get into kind of the flood plains. We can kind of talk a bit more about that and how we love to build on these areas, but obviously that can get ourselves in a bit of a pickle when we've built these lovely houses. Then it can flood. So there's lots of kind of discussions around that. It's almost also the point where we can talk about plastic pollution, because lots of children know that there's a big problem with plastics in the ocean. But if it goes into the river, then obviously that can end up in the sea as well. And if it's just wafting around your driveway as well, that could end up going down down into the drains and then end up into the river as well. So we talk a bit about plastic pollution there. We also talk about boating and ships and how we can kind of connect our land to the sea. So obviously we've got the kind of the heritage element there as well. We also talk about seagulls, just because, or gulls, any kind of watery bird that might like to hang out on the coast, just because it's another type of wildlife that you may not get right at the source of the river. And then to finish off, we talk about the kind of majestic salmon. So this a salmon can get this big. They're pretty monstrous fish, and they start their life as tiny little eggs right at the source. So we generally get a child to swim up with a salmon up the river from the sea all the way to the source, and they lay some not to size and not to scale, some lovely eggs into the gravel at the top of the river. So that kind of links it all together for them. So we encourage children to care about the river and get excited by the river. But then we obviously need to talk about how we can help our rivers. Obviously, we found out that they're really useful to humans, they're fantastic for wildlife, and what can we do to help them? So the most obvious one is to save water. We want the water to be in the rivers, and the more water we take out, the less is there for wildlife to enjoy. So obviously children can have the discussion around that, but we can save water in many different ways, and I know you guys will know all those reasons, because it's kind of drilled into us so much. Another thing to consider, like I've already mentioned with the plastic, is don't pollute. So like I mentioned, if your wheelie bin flaps open in the storm and a few bits of rubbish come out, they can go down the drain, and the drains will lead eventually to the river. So we have to consider everything. So our actions kind of on the street will impact our rivers. We also need to consider saving energy. So this is to do with our warming planet. So this can come if you've got a kind of a larger topic at school, for example, this might come into it as well. So our wildlife takes a long time to adapt, hundreds, thousands of years, millions of years even, can take to adapt to certain environments. And if we are heating up the planet really quickly, then the wildlife won't be able to cope. So if we save energy to reduce that kind of climate change, long-term climate change, then we can help our rivers in the long run. Another thing we can do is just enjoy the rivers and tell people about them. So if we're kind of enjoying our rivers responsibly, we can inform others or show others how to enjoy them. So this is the river very near my house. This is my daughter, and they just obviously they have me as a mother, so I kind of force it upon them. But they can just spend hours just looking at what's in there and various different water play activities. So that's kind of your basic kind of understanding rivers kind of section. The next thing I'd like to talk to you about is how to prepare kind of visiting a river. So kind of three main things we need to think about. I know it's very exciting to start talking about the activities and what you're going to do at the river, but there are three kind of main things that we need to consider before we do anything kind of whilst we're there. So location, risks and equipment. So I'm just going to whiz you through those things now before we crack on with showing you some of the activities that we do. Okay, so the location. This is just an example map of one of our sites that we can use, but it just kind of shows you what we've considered when we're going to visit a river. So the first thing is, ideally we want it local to the children, because if they can access it again and again, take their parents, or just or go and play there themselves responsibly, then that's wonderful. So local to children, if we can get it within walking distance of their home or their school, then that's the best thing that we can ask for. We also need to consider getting permission from the landowner. So even if it's a public site, there'll still be a landowner, whether that's the council, or it could be a lovely kind of private landowner that opens their property to the public. We still need to get permission. If we're going to take a class or an organised group, then we need to get permission. We also need to consider if we've got mobile phone reception. If it is publicly accessible. So if you do have a lovely public site that you've been given permission to use, you have to consider that there will be other people there as well. So whether that's you being a nuisance to them, or them being a nuisance to you. You also need to consider where you're going to park. So you obviously don't want to be blocking roads. Is there a car park? Can you park a minibus? Can you park a coach? Can you park somewhere else and walk there? And also consider traffic. So this example that I've got on the screen here, you have to cross a road, so we would automatically high vis everybody up and make sure that we've got a safe crossing area. You also need to think about where the emergency vehicles may access. So if you do have an accident there, rather than kind of trudging 10 minutes through a nature reserve, is there a quick and easy access? It may not be the access that you've used with the children, but there may be another quick way of getting in. You also need to think about an access point into the river itself. So you may not have one, but it's really wonderful if you do, because then at least if you can get in as an adult with tall wellies or with waders, then that is obviously a bonus, because then you can have a good old rummage around and see what's there. But you need to consider the access point being safe, and you may be able to get in, but can you get out? That's always a bonus. And then you need to think about the water depth. So how deep is it where you get in? How deep is it further along? You might need to give the children or yourself kind of boundaries of where to go. So you need to test where water depths are. Are they kind of pools and riffles in certain places? There's going to be deeper parts and shallower parts. It's also good to have viewing spots. So generally, if you're standing in the river, or you kind of all want to have everybody be able to see a part of the river whilst you're kind of maybe doing an introduction or whilst you're playing, it's really good to be able to view it. So rather than it just being one access point as a pinch point where people can't see in or out, then that can be a bit tricky. So wonderful to have a nice stretch of open area where everybody can see in and out. It's always really good to have open space as well, so you can do activities to the side of the river, so you're not just kind of stuck in the river and learning there. So kind of a nice open space is always a bonus. And if you're dealing with younger children, then toilets is always a bonus as well. So we have on this, we've got a local pub that we can ask desperately, but we tend to keep our sessions fairly short because of the age of our children and the lack of toilets on quite a lot of our sites. So thinking about risks now, one of the biggest things, I think the scariest things for a lot of teachers, especially when we kind of speak to teachers, is the water, is children potentially getting in the water, falling in the water. And most of our sites don't really have deep water. They are just kind of under welly depth. Or adult welly depth. However, it's something that you do need to consider, of course, because of our lovely British weather. The river flow goes up and down. So you obviously need to consider how deep it is. You need to consider how fast it's flowing. So if it's above your knee depth and it's got a flow to it, that can actually knock you sideways. So we always put a life jacket on if it's above our well, probably Tracy and I will probably put it on if we above our welly depth, but generally definitely over the knee. And then we have throw rope. So this picture here shows children. We do a water safety activity with children. So there's a child that has literally just thrown a throw rope, so a rope stuffed into a bag. They've thrown it at another child who's pretending to be drowning, and they're trying to work out if they can actually save their classmate. So we run this activity just to show them that they really need to consider these risks when they are going to be going by a river. We don't want them to dwell on it, but it is really important that they consider that is a big risk to them. But as teachers, it's perfectly manageable, and yeah, Tracy and I feel very comfortable with it. Of course, that's our job, but it's something that your risk assessments can mitigate against everything like that. If it's a raging torrent, we might choose a different site, or we might choose a different day where it hasn't been high rainfall. So talking about our lovely British weather, it's generally us adults that don't particularly want to go out in the rain, and we kind of project that onto the children. But generally, especially when they're young, if you wrap them up warm enough and kind of protect against the weather, children will be very happy to go out. But obviously we need to protect everybody against the weather. So if it's cold or wet, you need to make sure everybody's got wellies or waders. Everyone's got a waterproof jacket, trousers, woolly hat, gloves, and spares, lots of spares, and then spare clothes, because no doubt someone will go in, or someone will try and be dramatic and get a welly full of water, and it's hilarious, but at the same time, in an hour's time, they'll probably be shivering. So always make sure that we take spares. But at the same time, if it's hot, we wear wellies, but you can take beach shoes. We obviously make sure everybody has sun hat, sun cream. Their legs and arms are covered. Mostly, it's very tempting to just kind of turn up in swimming costume, but we tend to try and have our legs and our arms covered just to protect ourselves against plants and other kind of issues that we'll come across on site, which we'll talk through in a moment. And spare clothes, because again, they will get wet. If they're, especially on a hot day, they'll all be kicking each other, splashing with water. So take spare clothes, because it can get very, very cold if you are wet for a few hours. And then other things to consider on the site itself with the weather. So if it's high winds, that may not affect your session directly, but you might need to consider whether you're near trees or kind of overhanging branches, or electricity or telegraph poles and that kind of thing. So think anything that could kind of come down over you. You also need to consider electrical storms. Again, we love going out in the rain, as the children generally, but electrical storms are a bit of a no-no for us, for obvious reasons. High flow, so you may have had loads of rain the day before and it's a beautiful day today, but your river will obviously have that rain impacting them. So you need to consider that there might be some high flows, and the site may be muddy or very slippery, so your access point might be quite slippery, so just consider that. Another thing you need to consider are Weil's disease. So this is a leptospirosis. It's an infection that you can get from animals, so it's pretty rare in the UK, but it's still a consideration that you guys need to think about. It presents in flu-like symptoms and can be treated. You just need to go to the doctor. So if you've been playing in a river, or your children are playing in a river, and you get flu-like symptoms within the next kind of couple of weeks, then you just let them know that you have been playing in a river. But we treat it the same as how we treat COVID at the moment. We just sanitize constantly, and ask them not to pick their noses or rub their eyes and that kind of thing as they're playing in the river. Another risk is Lyme disease. So that's a bacterial infection that can be spread to humans by infected ticks. It's quite a horrible one that people don't like thinking about, but they are around, especially if you're going around in lots of lovely vegetated areas. It's something to consider, but it's really easy to treat if you diagnose it early. So I've put a lovely image there of what it kind of presents as. So it comes up as a bullseye shape, so that's just something to consider. And there's lots of other potential risks. I'll just quickly whiz through them. I don't want to dwell on it again, just because I want to get to the fun bit. So these will come up on a lot of your kind of usual risk assessments. So slips and trips, obviously, is uneven ground. Plants, things like stinging nettles, brambles, all that kind of stuff we need to consider. Fencing, there might be barbed wire, there might be electric fencing that needs to be thought about. The general public, as I've already said, us causing a nuisance or them causing a nuisance to us. A lot of dog walkers we come across, so some excitable dogs might come and say hello, so we just encourage everybody to gather together as a group, and the grown-ups will send them off. Dog poo is another thing to consider. So we generally scan the site before children arrive or as we arrive, and we'll do a bit of a poo pick if we can. Another risk is landowners. So if you haven't got permission from the landowners, then they are a potential risk to you, because they may be grumpy that you're there, or it might be some other landowners that, or nosy neighbours that might want to tell you what for. And another thing is think about farm machinery or other kind of farming activities that you have on that site. So we consider cattle at some of our sites, but obviously there might be various cuttings and that kind of stuff going on. So thinking about equipment, we'll talk through kind of other bits of equipment related to different activities, but generally we have a charged mobile phone with us. We also have a first aid kit with us. We also have a throw rope, even if it's just like a little piddle of a stream. A throw rope's always quite handy anyway. If someone does get kind of stuck in the access point, for example, we can always use the rope to kind of haul people out or gather equipment and that kind of stuff. Survival bags, so if you do have to wait a little bit of a while for emergency services to turn up, if someone had an accident, survival bag's just going to keep them warm. Hand sanitizer, because everybody has that anyway, but we have that for virus disease before COVID arrived. Obviously, you're going to have a risk assessment if you're in a kind of formal setting. Pee bags, generally quite useful anyway if you get wet clothes, but obviously for picking up dog poo. Spare clothes, like I said, a towel is generally quite welcome if you've got cold, wet hands, and any spare water, so if people run out or you need to kind of rinse anybody's eyes or anything like that. So that's the basic safety equipment. Let's move on to activities, shall we? So this is just kind of a few kind of snippets really of the activities that Tracy and I run with various different groups. Obviously, there's so many different things that you can do out there. Pinterest and various forums are very useful. But these are the things that we've kind of gathered along the way through our careers, and we spend many an hour discussing the exciting different activities we can be doing with children. So the first one Tracy brought to the trust from Blashford Lakes. The Wildlife Trust run this activity at Blashford Lakes, so they use it when they're considering, they've got obviously various lakes there that are used for kind of human consumption. The water is used for human kind of consumption, so it's really useful to kind of have this body of water that we're constantly taking from. So obviously it's really useful for rivers as well. So the idea of the water conservation trail is that you start with a bottle, so your kind of water usage for the day, and you have a spoon, and you go around to various different stations and you remove the amount of water that you might use in the day and put it in the bucket provided at that station. So you can basically choose, there's an example there, if you leave the tap running whilst you're brushing your teeth, then you use 6 spoonfuls of the water from your bottle. If you turn the tap off in between rinsing, then you use 1 spoon. And then you go through this whole process, and then at the end you can see who has the most remaining, who has the least remaining, and then it's a really good discussion point of how you can think about saving water. And the children, they can have lots of this kind of kit to take home to parents or siblings, and kind of rant to them about how important it is to save or to conserve the water. So that's a nice little exercise to do, just to get them thinking about how much we actually use. Another activity that we do quite a lot, because we are kind of surrounded by chalk streams here at Wessex Rivers Trust, we talk a lot about kind of water absorption within the chalk, within that sponge. And so I've got a little video here of a little demonstration. So we can give the children a clear pot, ask them to, once they've kind of had a look at the chalk, we ask them to put the chalk into the bucket and just sit and wait. And as you can see from this video, it bubbles, and that's just showing that the water is absorbing into the rock, and the air is being pushed out just like a sponge would do. So just imagine a sponge in a bath, putting that in and giving it a squeeze, the bubbles will come out. So that's a really lovely demonstration, and it's incredible how exciting bubbles can appear from a rock. But I never get bored of hearing the squeals of excitement. Another activity that you can do related to land use and kind of geology is filtration experiments. So you can see here, I think Tracy and I are quite excited to potentially have this in our office, these three kind of bottles on their sides. So you can see it's very obvious that if you have some lush vegetation and water and rain, water it like rainfall, you get lovely crystal clear water coming through, filtered through. And then as you move further right, the worse state your land is in, the worse the water will be. So to keep a nice healthy river, you want to have some lush vegetation. Trees are fantastic, of course, but any kind of coverage of the land, of the soil is wonderful. Another activity that we can do kind of this instant is sticking a sponge in the top of these clear pots that we use for the chalk kind of water absorption, and you start with a really mucky bit of water, filter it through a sponge, and then you get not quite as beautiful as those lovely three bottles, but you can see how much of a difference that sponge makes. And also probably the most instant and experimental one that you can do, which a lot of you guys have probably come across, is taking a drinks bottle, cutting it in half, turning the top half upside down and putting it in the bottom half, and then the children can experiment with different materials to filter the water. And this is essentially imagining that there's the rainwater or some mucky surface runoff that have come off the farmer's field, for example, and before it goes into the river, you can just imagine think about how you're going to stop that runoff and that kind of muck going into the river. So here they've used rocks, coarse sand, fine sand, and a coffee filter. And I did mention to Tracy earlier that Bear Grylls, I think he uses his underpants or a pair of socks or something gross to do this if he wants to find some drinking water, but I would not suggest that with the children. So we're going to move on to river dipping. This is our bread and butter, as you can imagine. It's a fantastic way to engage children in their local river. This list of equipment is just for your reference. It does explain it in the next clip. So there's a video which hopefully will give you some sound. So Tracy, if you can just let me know if you can hear the sound.
The aim of river dipping is to give people an idea of what lies beneath the surface of our rivers. Using this technique, we can explore and learn about all the incredible creatures living in this hidden underwater world. All you need is a cheap net and a bucket to get you started. However, at the Wessex Rivers Trust, we like to get a bit more technical. All equipment should be cleaned and dried after river dipping to avoid any disease or invasive species spreading to other rivers. Carefully step into the water using the net to guide you. Place the net on the riverbed with the water flowing through the mesh. Kick the riverbed about a metre upstream of the net. Water will flow through the net, carrying animals you have gently dislodged from the riverbed right into the net. Do this again in various places across the river, including the margins, main channel and patches of vegetation. Once you have gathered everything in your net, give the sample a little wash in the river to remove any fine sediment. Carefully turn the net upside down over a white tray. Gently empty the net and wash it out in the tray, ensuring no creatures are stuck in the net. Sit quietly, wait, and watch for your tray to come alive, with tiny movements of animals crawling and swimming around your tray. Use the spoons and small net to move the animals into the sampling tray and magnifying pots to get a closer look. Depending on where you river dip, you will get different results. Some places will just have a few animals, while others may be teeming with life. To learn more about the animals you may find while river dipping, check out our YouTube channel.
Okay, so hopefully that kind of explains that nice and clearly to you. Obviously, if you're going to do that with children and you haven't done that before, probably best to go and have a little try yourself, just have a little play, just to make sure that you are happy with doing it. But it's a really simple activity, and it's amazing how much time it takes to just, you can just spend hours there with the children, kind of engaging with that. So I have also sent in your resources pack, there's also a link to the YouTube channel where you can find lots of videos on different facts from different animals. So another thing that we really like to do at the Rivers Trust is to magnify these wonderful animals that you'd find whilst river dipping. So Tracy's looking very excited there, using her brand new microscope. And again, I've given you the resource link to the particular microscope that we use, but it's a digital microscope and it's really useful to show the children the creatures really up close and personal, and you can look at the adaptations of the particular creatures. And again, I've given you in your resource pack, I've given you loads of fact sheets about these animals. So if you wanted to kind of have a closer look, or you know, just take them to the river, you can teach the children about those particular creatures that you find. Other things that we love to do are get creative. So we like teaching the science, but at the same time, we really want children to value their river and to really take a closer look at the animals and the things that they're kind of finding in the river. So one thing we do, which a lot of outdoor educators love to use, is clay, just because it's so easy to use, really accessible, and you can get the children to have a real close look at. So this is a freshwater shrimp. So that's the picture that the child had, and they've obviously produced that wonderful freshwater shrimp in clay, which they can obviously then take home to their families and show off as they should. Other things that we like to do is to get them to paint or use charcoals or any kind of media really to produce some artwork. So again, this is the picture that a child was given. This is a bull head, same as what was displayed in that video just then. So they've just, I think we probably only gave them maybe 15-20 minutes, and they can produce, just really looking closely at the size of the fins, size of the eyes, the position that they're in, and that kind of thing. Really gets them looking nice and close at the animals and their adaptations. Tracy and I also love to do a little bit of willow weaving, and the children seem to as well, and it's just great to kind of get them thinking about the shape of the fish. And again, it's just something for them to take home and to display to their families. It's something that they can be really proud of, because it takes a while, and it just allows them to just kind of connect and just sit. Lovely to do it by the river as well, if you can. If you wanted to do some willow weaving, something like a fish is obviously really easy to get you started. And we tend to use sunset willow growers or Musgrove willow growers. So they can just provide you with a small amount of willow or a large amount of willow. You just soak it in your bath, or if you've got like an outdoor pond or something, anywhere that you can kind of soak it, and then it just becomes again really kind of versatile, and you can do different things with it. Other things we can do with children are to make rafts. So depending on the age of the children, I quite like giving them a challenge. So I basically have a ball of string, a pair of scissors, and just say, can you make me a raft? And they can go and find some sticks and work out ways of having something that floats. That's essentially all they need. But you can see two different examples here. So one was a slightly older child who's made quite a substantial raft, and another child who just gathered a load of sticks and just wrapped that string around, made it nice and tight, but they've even got a little sail on there. Both equally wonderful, and took various amounts of time, but they're just really nice little activities to do. And obviously you make it on the bank and can send it on its way down the river, or have races, anything like that. You can also make rafts just out of purely natural materials. So this is a rush raft. So this is just made out of a rush on the side of the riverbank. It's essentially wrapped around in a spiral, and then wrapped around tight, so it's kind of all together, and then the end kind of pokes up through the middle, so you're kind of tying a very basic knot through the middle, and then the leaf is just sail. And I think I've got a little clip of it going for its little journey down the river. There we go, just to prove that they work. So that moves nicely on really to talking about river schools, or the concept of river schools. So this is something that the Rivers Trust as a whole is potentially looking into, working with the Forest School Association in producing like river schools or qualification within. So I can imagine a lot of you are familiar with forest schools, but I'm just going to quickly run through this. So Forest School is a child-centered inspirational learning process that offers opportunities for holistic growth through regular sessions. So rather than just a one-off trip to the woods, or in this case, trip to the river, it's a longer process where children start to feel more comfortable within that environment, and they can just kind of ease themselves into really wonderful learning experiences. So going back to forest schools, so it's a long-term process, like I said, at least 6 sessions, ideally in a natural environment, ideally with trees, but in this case it would be ideally with a river or some kind of watery environment. Excuse me. It's learner-centered, so child-led. That is the aim. So that we're not just kind of saying, and now let's do some river dipping, now let's make a raft. You can maybe offer those activities, put the equipment there, and the child can choose what they do. So it's aimed at holistic development, so producing resilient, confident, independent and creative learners. So again, rather than them just kind of being told what to do and ticking on off a particular kind of curriculum link, this is kind of, it's much more a rounded experience. So we encourage supported risks appropriate to that particular child or that particular group. So you can see the picture that I've put on here. This is a toddler who is peeling a stick. She's doing that with the help of an adult. She hasn't done it before, and so the adult is clearly guiding the child. But then over time, that child will learn how to manage their own risks, and you can get children of that age that can do that themselves. If you've watched them do it several times before, they can manage that risk. Same within a river. If a child is sensible within a river environment, then you can give them much more kind of freedom to play within. And then with forest schools, we ask that it's always run by a qualified practitioner, and we would expect the same from a river school. Excuse me. So The river school concept is the same as forest school, but generally wetter. We'd like to see children in waders. So the waders that these guys have on, they are thigh waders. So they're much easier to get on. It's basically like a really long welly. But chest waders obviously go up to their chest. They're like big pair of dungarees, waterproof dungarees, which are really wonderful, and children can sit down in the river if they would like. So they're much more kind of useful, but in terms of kind of getting them on and off small children, the thigh waders are better. And the same with forest school. If you're having, if you're doing like a high risk activity, so for example, with forest school, if you have a fire, you always have someone watching the fire, or if you have tools, you always have someone watching the tools. Same with the river schools. You've got a river there, that is a big risk. The water is the big risk. So you always have someone watching the water. And you'll have set boundaries like you do with a forest school to play within. But the idea, the concept is that you essentially just allow them to experience it on a regular basis and just play and allow them to do what they like. So you might want to provide some nets and buckets. There's obviously, there'll be mud there, different materials for them to use. There might be some colanders you can use, or there might be water wheels, bowls. I always take my children to the river with a set of bowls, and they always race them down the river. So we never have to worry about walking any particular distance with them. If you give them a bowl next to a river, they'll just float them down. But obviously you can use the vegetation, the same as those rafts there. But yeah, there's endless activities you can do. And then kind of moving on from there, thinking about how children can value their river in the long term. Again, not just the kind of one stop, one visit to a river, tick that box from the curriculum or from your topic or whatever you're doing. It's really wonderful to get the children to value their river, really think and engage them with their particular river. And how we like to do this is through Mayfly in the classroom. So you've got lots of resources from Mayfly in the classroom, and on the Wild Trout Trust website, which again is in your resource pack, they've got loads of information for teachers or educators on this. But the basic concept is that mayfly, they lay their eggs in the water, and they hatch and they become nymphs, which again live in the water. They spend most of their life in the water. And what you can do is you can take a decent sized nymph home with you, or into the classroom, and put it in a homemade aquarium. So I've given you instructions on how to make a very simple aquarium. So you make it with plastic bottles. You need an air pump and some air stones. So as long as you've got that kind of basic equipment, then you can kind of keep these things alive, and then they will eventually hatch. If they're kind of in a happy environment, they will hatch. And the children this can take, you know, a few weeks to happen, it could take several weeks, but the children can manage that environment for the mayfly. And if it's in their classroom or in your kitchen at home, or in a visitor centre, then the children can keep an eye on it. They can manage the temperature. We use ice blocks here. They need to check to see if any nymphs are emerging and becoming mayfly. And there's different monitoring ways that you can do that. But it's just really wonderful to kind of have this kind of magical event. It's a bit like having butterflies in your classroom, but this is obviously river linked. And then when they do emerge, they'll crawl up a bit of vegetation, or we've got sticks in here. You can keep them in the Tupperware in the fridge until it's release day, and then on a hot sunny day you can take the mayfly out with the class back to the river, and then once they've kind of warmed up, you can pick them out of the Tupperware, hold them on your finger. Children can hold them if they'd like, and then once they're kind of ready to go, they'll just fly off and do their mayfly thing. There might be a group already hatched out on that particular day. That's the ideal. So they can go off mate, and then they'll lay the eggs in the river. So it's just a really wonderful kind of extended activity that children can be involved in. If river schools is not an option, then mayfly in the classroom is obviously something there that they can do. So the last thing from this section of the course is a little video that we produced with Downton Primary School. We had the help of some film producers, so it just kind of gives you, hopefully it'll kind of give you a bit of an idea of things that we kind of offer at the trust and things that you guys can do with your own groups.
We really liked the interactive nature of the sessions and the fact that they were multi-sensory with lots of movement and games.
My favourite activity was the river dipping because it's really cool to see all the living creatures and their environment that they live in. My favourite activity was building the mayfly aquariums because it was fun to work as a team and see what would happen to the mayfly. My favourite activity probably was the game because it got the salmon life cycle really stuck into my head. I liked the willow weaving because I found it really interesting that you could actually weave an actual tree.
I liked all of it. I really did like all of it. It was very interactive, pitched really good. Children enjoyed it, had fun. They've learnt a huge amount.
I learned that it's really fun to learn about rivers and that our rivers are really special to us.
It's important to look after our rivers and wildlife.
Stop taking as much water out of the river. Definitely stop polluting.
I really enjoyed it because the past 3 days have just been really fun because we got to do loads of activities and I just found that really interesting and just really happy. And I'm just happy.
I think this whole project has been a real success. It was really well organised, really well thought through, opportunities for them to try out different things, different styles of learning, and the whole experience from them, whether it's been making the aquariums, whether it's been creating things out of wicker, whether it's been getting into the river and finding out what's there. Whatever it's been, there has been a huge learning experience for each and every one of those, and for me too, which is great.
I would say the experience the children have had over the last 3 weeks is not just a school learning experience, it's a life enriching experience. I don't think it's something they'll ever forget.
It's just been a really enjoyable few sessions, really enjoyable, and I would recommend it to any school to incorporate it.
Wessex Rivers Trust offers river education sessions throughout East Dorset, South Wiltshire and West Hampshire. We run interactive activities in assemblies, riverbank sessions and classroom sessions. These are ideal to link with topic work and to support teachers getting their class outdoors and doing something different. To find out more, visit our website wessexrt.org.uk.
So hopefully that's kind of given you guys kind of the ideas and the kind of practicalities of these activities that can be done with a school group. At this point, I'm just going to pause just to ask you guys if you've got any questions, any specific questions that you'd like to ask, if you could pop them in the chat. Then Tracy can have a little look through those, and if there are any, then we can kind of go through them at the end. I've got a few slides from the South Downs National Park Authority to run through with you, so I'll just make sure that I'll read their notes just to make sure that I don't miss anything. So this training is part of a wider programme delivered by the South Downs Education Network. Wessex Rivers Trust is a member of the network, which is a collective of over 100 education sites, centres and practitioners based in and around the National Park that deliver activities for schools and other groups to help them better understand the special qualities of this protected landscape. The South Downs National Park can provide the setting or context for a locally relevant curriculum for your school. Members of the South Downs Education Network offer a range of trips, outreach sessions, where we will come into your school to teach groups. They do online sessions and downloadable teaching resources. Please consider getting in touch as part of your planning to let us support you as much as possible. So obviously, us at the Rivers Trust, we only fit into a relatively small section of that, but there's a lot of different organisations that can offer lots of different activities that all fit into the curriculum. We appreciate that most of you trips into the national park are going to take place on a weekly basis, but by taking part in today's training, you are helping to build learning outside the classroom into your school's curriculum and affording the associated benefits to pupils and staff. We believe that understanding more about National Park from nature to recreation to jobs is an important part of young people's development, as they will be part of the landscape, not just while in school, but for the rest of their lives. You can find all the education centres and providers on the South Downs National Park website. I also popped that in the email as well for you guys if you wanted to catch up on this course. There are also teacher resources and information about grants for schools, which can support your school with the cost of booking providers and travelling to sites in the national park. So they do actually, at the moment, they've got an active grant for travel and for booking sessions. So you apply to the national park, and then they can provide you with the grant to carry out particular activities that you want to book on. It's also worth checking with your local authority outdoor education advisor. They offer educational visits, a visit coordinator training, and a range of help and guidance when it comes to the practical matters around planning trips, including health and safety considerations and compliance. Finally, if today's session inspires you to discover more about the South Downs and the national parks in general, it might be worth visiting their learning resources on the nationalparks.uk website, which includes a scheme of work with a wealth of resources, detailed background notes, engaging learning ideas and assessment guidance, which has been written by specialists for teachers at Key Stage 2 and 3. So that's it for the kind of presentation part of the course. I don't know if we have any questions, Tracy. I'm just going to try. I'm trying to stop my share. There we go.
Cool. We had I don't think we've had any questions just now, so if anybody does want to add anything, do feel free, although Teresa has very kindly put herself out there and said that she is part of the outdoor education team at Hampshire, so can help anyone with activities and planning and things, so that's good.
Yeah, thank you very much, Teresa.
Earlier on, I'll have a look, there's a new message, I'll have a look at that one in a moment, but earlier on there was, I think, a bit of interest for something on geography, so more kind of field studies activities, so that's something that we can maybe do at another point. Ellie mentioned being interested more in the ecology and processes, so again, ecology side, we could maybe do something on species and macroinverts and things like that, a bit more specific fish, perhaps another time. She also mentioned wanting to set up a Friends of the River Ebble group, so which is very cool, and the Ebble is in our catchment, so I don't know if you wanted to say anything about the Ebble, Amy.
Yeah, I think that is Ben as well, who I think I've had a conversation with. Yes, so it's a really lovely idea, and I think having friends of particular river groups, so we're thinking about doing that in Downton, which is where I live, which is south of Salisbury, is having friends of, so that's a really wonderful way of connecting people with their local river, and just there are a few local groups that have kind of friends of, I'm not sure they call them friends of, but and it works really well. So that I think they kind of started off as just doing like a monthly or weekly litter pick around their river, but then they've like created loads of kind of exciting habitats within their small kind of stretch of river, and they run education days and community events and stuff. So yeah, really nice idea. So yeah, I think that's a really exciting idea. And the Ebble, as Ellie and Ben have that kind of at their hearts, is that it's a really wonderful project that we're working on at the Rivers Trust, which is trying to engage as many people, local people, as possible. So that's south of Salisbury as well. Yeah.
The other thing that came up earlier as well was Trina mentioned practical support with practical school-led river work. So hopefully the slides on kind of organising your visit, planning, what to take into account, kit, and all of that thing was of use, Trina, and you found those slides useful?
I'm very happy to, if people have further questions or want more information on any particular things in the future, just drop me an email. You should all have my email now. Yeah, we're very happy to kind of answer those questions. And yes, it's great that there's interest there for future courses as well, with the ecology and the kind of geography side of things, maybe for the slightly older child as well. So yeah, that's wonderful.
Great. I think I've covered, I think that's everything. So if I've missed anything, if anybody does want to pop anything else in the chat, please feel free, or if anybody else has got a last question. But yeah, I think we've covered everything, and I think there's definitely an interest there for kind of geography and that fieldwork side of things. So yeah,
that'll keep you busy then, Tracy. Okay, well that's wonderful. Thank you very much to everybody who's joined today. Like I said, please do just drop me an email if you have any further questions or want to know more about the work that Wessex Rivers Trust do. But yeah, thank you for spending the time with us this afternoon. And yeah, hopefully we'll see some of you guys soon on the riverbank. Oh, there's one last question. I've just popped that up there. How will we hear about future sessions? So you can visit the South Downs National Park website, which again kind of went into my email. It was also in the presentation, where you can kind of look. They kind of scheduled future sessions, kind of courses. So there's different kind of ways that you can connect with the national park. So have a look on that website. With regards to Wessex Rivers Trust, just get into contact with us if you would like to kind of book any kind of sessions with us.
And I guess the other thing is, Teresa, I think she's still there. If anybody wants to get in touch with you, Amy, I'm guessing, has got your email address. Are you happy that we pass that on if anybody wants to track you down, to ask you questions or advice or anything?
Yeah, no problem at all. So yeah, you can find us on the Evolve website if you're a Hampshire school, and just pop an email through to outdoor.ed@hampshire.gov.uk, and we can help. Any river trips need to be put onto the Evolve system as well from the schools.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Thanks, Teresa. Okay, I'm hoping that's all our questions now. So I'll end the session there. So thank you very much, everybody. Lovely to have you on here.